In the marble foyer of her childhood home in Millbrook, Ohio, a transgender woman was about to face the ultimate family rejection. What started as a hopeful Christmas homecoming took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her mother's calculated cruelty. Maya Johnson wasn't your typical social worker. For 5 years, she had spent her life helping LGBTQ+ youth navigate hostile environments, known for her unwavering compassion and fierce advocacy for authentic living. When she encountered her family's systematic exclusion during what should have been a celebration, she had no idea she was walking into a moment that would transform multiple generations. Maya's decision to accept exile with dignity rather than fight for acceptance would lead to the most important mentorship of her life. What began as banishment to a garage would become a sanctuary for truth-telling. The Johnson family would never be the same after one brave teenager chose authenticity over safety, learning that some family bonds transcend biology, while others must be courageously released. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Johnson's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she passed the familiar green sign. Welcome to Millbrook, Ohio. Population 3,847. The number hadn't changed since she'd left 5 years ago, but everything else seemed smaller somehow. The Dairy Queen where she'd gotten her first job still stood on the corner of Main and Cedar, though its red paint had faded to the color of dried blood. The old Methodist church's steeple still pierced the gray December sky like an accusation. Her Honda Civic, loaded with carefully wrapped Christmas presents that had taken her weeks to choose, felt like a time machine carrying her backward through layers of memory and pain. Every street corner held ghosts of the person she used to be, or rather, the person everyone had insisted she was. Michael Johnson, star of the high school debate team, dutiful son, the boy who'd never quite fit but had tried so damn hard to disappear into the shape others expected. The steel mill smokestacks rose in the distance, though only one still produced the gray plumes that had once meant prosperity for families like hers. Her father's mill. Frank Johnson had worked there for 32 years before his heart gave out 3 years ago, leaving behind a widow who blamed everyone but herself for the silence that had grown between them and their youngest child. Maya pulled into the parking lot of Morrison's Gas and Go, needing a moment before facing the modest 2-story house that had once been home. Through the store's windows, she could see Jake Morrison, now sporting a beard and the kind of steady weight that came with settled happiness, helping an elderly customer with a bag of road salt. Jake had been one of the few people who'd reached out after she'd transitioned, sending awkward but genuine Facebook messages that said more than most family members ever had. She pulled out her phone, her fingers finding Sarah's number with the muscle memory of frequent use. "Hey, beautiful." Sarah's voice came through clear and warm, carrying with it the scent of rain on Portland streets and the safety of chosen family. "You there yet?" Sitting outside Morrison's, looking at the house, Maya's voice caught slightly. "There are cars everywhere. Looks like the whole extended family's already here." "Of course they are. Nothing like a good old-fashioned ambush disguised as holiday spirit." Sarah's tone carried the particular brand of sarcasm that had sustained Maya through her darkest moments. "You still have your out, you know. I've got the spare room ready, Chinese takeout in the fridge, and that documentary about penguin families you wanted to watch." Maya smiled despite the knot in her stomach. "Tempting. But I need to try this. For me, not for them. Just remember, you don't owe them anything. Not your pain, not your smallness, not your silence. You're Maya fucking Johnson, and you help kids find themselves for a living. If they can't see how incredible you are, that's their failure, not yours." The words wrapped around Maya like armor, the way they always did. Sarah had been there through every step of her transition. The hormone appointments, the legal name change, the slow, terrifying process of becoming visible as herself. More sister than friend, more family than most blood relatives. "I love you," Maya said. "Love you too. Now go show them what they've been missing." Maya ended the call and sat for another moment, watching the Christmas lights blink on the house across the street. The Kowalskis had always gone overboard with decorations, and this year was no exception. Their yard looked like Santa's workshop, had exploded, lawn reindeer, candy cane pathway lights, and an inflatable snowman that had seen better decades. Her childhood home, by contrast, displayed Teresa's more restrained approach to holiday decorating. White lights strung with military precision along the roofline, a single wreath on the front door, and her mother's prized nativity scene arranged on the front lawn with the same careful attention to detail that Teresa brought to everything she considered worthy of public display. Maya could see additional cars in the driveway, her Uncle Rick's pickup truck, her cousin Amy's minivan with its collection of honor student bumper stickers, and what looked like Pastor Hendrick's sedan. The sight of that last vehicle made her stomach clench. Nothing said, "We need spiritual intervention," like bringing the preacher to Christmas Eve dinner. She gathered her purse and the bag of gifts, each one chosen with the desperate hope that the right present might somehow bridge 5 years of silence. A book of local history for her mother, who collected such things. A craft beer brewing kit for David, who'd always talked about trying it. Age-appropriate but thoughtful gifts for Lily and the other kids, researched carefully online since she no longer knew their current interests. The distance from her car to the front door couldn't have been more than 50 feet, but it felt like crossing a minefield. Through the windows, she could see warm light and moving figures, the choreography of family gathering that had once included her, but now proceeded without any space for her presence. She paused on the front steps, hearing the familiar sounds of home through the door. David's laugh, deeper now than she remembered. Children's voices raised in the peculiar excitement that Christmas Eve brought. The murmur of adult conversation over what was probably her mother's famous Christmas punch. For a moment, Maya felt the old impulse to run, to get back in her car, drive to Portland, and spend Christmas with Sarah and their chosen family of social workers, artists, and fellow travelers who understood that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. Instead, she rang the doorbell. The sounds inside stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. Footsteps approached the door, the careful, measured pace she recognized as her mother's. The deadbolt turned with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the winter air. Teresa Johnson opened the door, and for a moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other across the threshold. Maya saw her mother taking inventory, the longer hair, the careful makeup, the fitted red coat that flattered her figure in ways her old clothes never had. Teresa's face cycled through emotions too quickly to catalog. Shock, recognition, something that might have been grief. "Hello, Mom," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Maya, your daughter. I'm home for Christmas." Teresa's hand remained on the doorframe, blocking the entrance as effectively as a gate. Her Christmas sweater, red wool with an embroidered wreath, seemed to mock the tension crackling between them. Behind her, Maya could see figures gathering in the hallway, like spectators at an accident. Teresa's voice faltered, then recovered with the particular strength that came from falling back on familiar scripts. "Michael, you came." The wrong name hit Maya like a physical blow, but she'd prepared for this. "Maya," she corrected gently. "I go by Maya now. I sent you the letter about the name change." "Yes, I—" Teresa's eyes darted toward the curious faces gathering behind her. "I got it." The silence stretched between them, filled with 5 years of unspoken words, unmailed letters, and the ghost of every conversation they'd never managed to have. Maya felt the weight of every person watching from inside the house, measuring her against memories of the child they'd once known. "May I come in?" Maya asked. "It's cold out here, and I brought presents." Teresa stepped aside with visible reluctance, and Maya crossed the threshold into the house where she'd learned to walk, to read, to dream of a life beyond the narrow boundaries of Millbrook, Ohio. The smell hit her immediately. Pine from the Christmas tree, cinnamon from her mother's holiday candles, and underneath it all, the particular scent of home that no amount of time or distance could erase. She was inside. The first step was taken, and somewhere in the space between the door closing behind her and the uncertain future stretching ahead, Maya Johnson began the most important Christmas of her life. She was inside. The first step was taken. And somewhere in the space between, the door closing behind her and the uncertain future stretching ahead, Maya Johnson began the most important Christmas of her life. The hallway felt smaller than memory suggested, its wood-paneled walls lined with the same family photographs that had watched over her childhood. But now Maya noticed what she'd been too young to understand before. How the pictures told. Different. But good different. From across the room she became aware of another presence, a stillness that radiated disapproval, like heat from a radiator. Jessica Johnson stood near the Christmas tree, her blonde hair perfect despite the kitchen work, her smile as fixed and brittle as the angel ornament perched on the tree's highest branch. "Jessica," Maya said, extending her hand in a gesture that felt formal and strange. "Thank you for having me." Jessica's handshake lasted exactly as long as politeness required and not a moment longer. Of course, family is family. The words carried all the warmth of a legal document. Technically correct but devoid of genuine feeling. The other relatives began to introduce themselves, a parade of names and relationships that Maya struggled to place. Aunt Linda, looking older and more tired than she remembered. Cousin Amy's husband, Steve, who seemed genuinely confused by the entire situation. Amy herself, trying too hard to be normal and friendly, while her eyes kept darting between Maya and her own teenage children, as if measuring some invisible contamination. And then, like a small hurricane, Lily Johnson burst into the room. Maya's 16-year-old niece had grown tall and gangly since the last family photos David had reluctantly shared, all elbows and knees, and the kind of unconscious grace that came with youth. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her eyes, David's eyes but brighter somehow, more questioning, took in the scene with intelligence that missed nothing. "Aunt Maya!" Lily's voice carried across the room with pure, uncomplicated joy. And before anyone could react, she had crossed the space between them and thrown her arms around Maya in a hug that was fierce and warm and utterly genuine. The silence that followed was profound. Maya felt every adult in the room recalibrating, measuring this moment against their own expectations and finding themselves somehow lacking. Lily's embrace was everything the others had withheld. Acceptance without condition, love without negotiation, welcome without reservation. "I can't believe you're actually here," Lily whispered, still holding tight. "I've been hoping you'd come home for Christmas." Maya's eyes found Jessica across the room, noting the way her face had gone pale, the particular tight-lipped expression that suggested lectures and groundings in Lily's immediate future. But in this moment, holding her niece and feeling truly welcomed for the first time since walking through the door, Maya allowed herself to feel hopeful. "I've been hoping the same thing," she whispered back. When Lily finally pulled away, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I have so much to tell you. Can we talk later? Just us?" "Of course," Maya said, aware that the simple exchange had somehow shifted the entire dynamic in the room. The adults were watching Lily with the particular attention reserved for children who had just said something either wonderful or terrible, though which one remained to be determined. Teresa cleared her throat with the authority of someone reasserting control over her own home. "Well, I suppose we should discuss dinner arrangements. We're having quite a crowd this year, and the dining room table only seats 8 comfortably." Maya felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees as the real purpose of this gathering began to reveal itself. This wasn't just a family reunion, it was a test. A series of small humiliations designed to establish exactly where she stood in the family hierarchy. "We could always put a card table in the living room," Uncle Rick suggested with the helpful tone of someone who hadn't caught the subtext. "That would be terribly awkward," Jessica said quickly. "Besides, we'll want to use the good china, and you can't properly serve a formal dinner on a card table." "Well," Teresa said, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who had been building toward this moment. "I've been thinking. The garage is actually quite comfortable this time of year. Frank insulated it so well before he passed. And there's that old table he used for his projects. We could set up a lovely space out there." The words landed in the room, like stones thrown into still water, sending ripples of shock and discomfort through the assembled family. Maya felt her face flush with humiliation and rage, but years of navigating hostile environments had taught her to recognize the moment when reaction would only make things worse. David's face had gone red, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words that wouldn't completely detonate the family gathering. "Mom, that's the garage?" "It's perfectly clean," Teresa said defensively. "And warm. Frank always said it was more comfortable than the basement." Maya looked around the room, seeing her extended family's faces as they processed what was happening. Some looked genuinely shocked, others uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. Jessica's expression was carefully neutral, but Maya caught the small, satisfied smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth. And then, cutting through the awkward silence like a knife through butter, came the sharp voice of Margaret Wilson. "Teresa Marie Johnson, what in the Sam Hill is wrong with you?" Nana Wilson stood in the doorway, like an avenging angel in a Christmas sweater, her silver hair perfectly styled, her cane planted firmly on the hardwood floor. At 82, she moved slowly, but spoke with the authority of someone who had raised children during the Depression and buried 2 husbands without losing her sense of right and wrong. "Mother," Teresa said, her voice taking on the plaintive tone of a child caught misbehaving, "we simply don't have enough room at the table for everyone." "Horse feathers," Nana said, making her way into the room with the careful dignity of age. "I counted 8 chairs around that table when I helped you set it this morning, and I see exactly 8 adults in this room, unless someone's been doing math differently since I was in school." Maya watched as her grandmother's sharp eyes took in the scene. The uncomfortable relatives, David's obvious distress, Jessica's defensive posture, and Lily's confusion at the adult's strange behavior. "The garage," Nana continued, her voice carrying the particular scorn reserved for ideas so stupid they offended her intelligence, "is for cars and lawnmowers and Christmas decorations. It is not for family dinners, and any daughter of mine who suggests otherwise needs to take a long, hard look at herself in the mirror." Teresa's face flushed red, caught between her mother's disapproval and her own stubborn conviction. "Mother, you don't understand. This is complicated." "Complicated how? Child comes home for Christmas, family sits down for dinner together. Seems pretty simple to me." Nana's gaze swept the room, landing on each family member in turn. "Unless someone wants to explain to me exactly what's so complicated about loving your own blood." The silence that followed was charged with the particular tension that came from truth spoken aloud that everyone had been trying to avoid. Maya felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the house's heating system. Here, finally, was someone willing to call out the cruelty disguised as practicality. "Maya," Nana said, turning toward her granddaughter with eyes that held no judgment, only curiosity and something that looked like pride. "You look beautiful, honey. Like you finally figured out who you're supposed to be." The simple acceptance in those words hit Maya harder than all the rejection that had preceded it. This woman, born in 1942, raised in an era when people like Maya were invisible or worse, was offering the kind of unconditional love that her own mother couldn't seem to manage. "Thank you, Nana," Maya said, her voice rough with emotion. "Now then," Nana continued, settling into the armchair that had been hers for as long as Maya could remember. "Someone needs to explain to me why we're standing around arguing about seating arrangements when there's perfectly good food getting cold in the kitchen. Teresa, you'll set another place at the table. David, you'll help your mother remember her manners. And everyone else will stop acting like we're entertaining the Queen of England and start acting like the family we're supposed to be." The room began to move again, people finding their voices and their purposes as Nana's words broke the spell of awkwardness that had held them frozen. Maya caught David's eye and saw relief there, gratitude for their grandmother's intervention, and perhaps shame at his own failure to speak up sooner. But even as the immediate crisis passed, Maya could feel the undercurrent still swirling beneath the surface. Jessica's tight smile promised future conversations behind closed doors. Teresa's rigid posture suggested that this battle was far from over. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Lily watched everything with the particular intensity of a teenager trying to understand the adult world's incomprehensible rules. As the family began to migrate toward the kitchen and dining room, Maya found herself walking beside her grandmother, matching her slow but determined pace. "Nana," she said quietly, "thank you." "Don't thank me yet, honey," Nana replied, her voice low enough that only Maya could hear. "This is just the opening round. But I want you to remember something. You don't fight for someone's right to love you. Love freely given is the only kind worth having. You fight for your right to be yourself, and you let the love fall where it may." The words settled into Maya's chest like seeds planted in fertile ground, carrying with them the promise of wisdom she would need in the battles to come. As they reached the dining room, where Teresa was grudgingly setting an additional place, Mom got me these. I've been wanting to try painting. Maya settled on the floor beside her niece, noting how Jessica's eyes tracked the interaction with the vigilance of a security guard. They're beautiful. What do you want to paint? Everything, Lily said with the expansive enthusiasm of 16. People, places, feelings. I want to paint things that matter. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and Maya caught the brief flash of concern that crossed Jessica's face. Even casual conversations were minefields now, loaded with potential for influence and corruption. Maya, David called from beside the tree, holding up a wrapped package. This one's for you, from all of us. The gift was beautifully wrapped, in paper that coordinated with the room's Christmas theme, the kind of careful presentation that spoke of genuine effort. Maya unwrapped it to find a framed photo of the family from last Christmas. Everyone gathered around this same tree, smiling at the camera. Her absence was a visible gap in the composition, a missing piece that made the happiness feel incomplete. We thought. David's voice trailed off as he seemed to realize the photo's unintended message. We thought you'd want to have a picture of everyone. Maya stared at the image, seeing not inclusion, but exclusion. Not family, but reminder of what she'd lost by choosing to be herself. The gift was well-intentioned but devastating, a crystallization of exactly how her family saw her, as someone who existed outside their happiness, looking in from a distance. Thank you, she said, because what else could she say? It's lovely. But the moment had shifted something in the room's atmosphere, reminding everyone of the complicated dynamics they were all trying to navigate. Maya distributed her own carefully chosen gifts, watching as each recipient unwrapped presents that felt like desperate attempts at connection across an widening gulf. Her mother accepted the book of local history with polite thanks and no warmth. David seemed genuinely pleased with the brewing kit, but his enthusiasm felt performed for the benefit of the watching family. Only Lily's reaction felt authentic. Genuine delight at the art history book Maya had chosen, one that featured diverse artists and perspectives often overlooked in traditional collections. This is amazing, Lily said, flipping through pages that showcased work by Indigenous artists, LGBTQ+ creators, and others whose voices had been marginalized by mainstream art history. I've never seen anything like this. Jessica's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. What an interesting selection of artists. The comment carried enough venom to poison a well, but Maya kept her expression neutral. I thought Lily might enjoy seeing different perspectives. Art is more powerful when it includes all voices. Some voices, Jessica said with the particular tone reserved for delivering what she considered objective truth, promote values that undermine traditional family structures. The room went quiet except for the sound of children playing with new toys, blissfully unaware of the adult tensions swirling around them. Maya felt the familiar burn of having to defend her existence, her choices, her very right to be acknowledged as human. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang with the timing of divine intervention or cosmic irony. Teresa hurried to answer it, returning with Pastor Robert Hendricks in tow, his clerical collar visible beneath his winter coat, his presence adding another layer of institutional authority to an already fraught gathering. Pastor Hendricks, Teresa said with the particular relief of someone who had been waiting for reinforcement. How wonderful that you could join us for dinner. The pastor was a man in his 50s who had built his reputation on charismatic sermons and careful navigation of his congregation's conservative expectations. Maya had known him since childhood, remembered him as someone who seemed genuinely kind but was bound by the theological constraints of his position. Merry Christmas, everyone, he said, his eyes finding Maya and lingering there with what might have been compassion or calculation. Teresa invited me to share in your family celebration. Maya understood immediately why he was here. This wasn't a social invitation. It was a spiritual intervention, an attempt to bring religious authority to bear on the family's problem. She felt a familiar weariness settle over her. The exhaustion that came from being treated like a puzzle to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Pastor, she said, standing to shake his hand with as much dignity as she could muster. Good to see you. And you, he replied, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had been briefed on the situation in advance. I understand you've been living in Portland. Yes. I work as a social worker there. I help LGBTQ+ youth navigate family and social challenges. The words were chosen deliberately, a quiet declaration that she would not be ashamed of her work or her community. Pastor Hendricks nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. Important work, he said finally. Young people facing difficult circumstances need guidance and support. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't condemnation either, and Maya found herself grateful for even that small mercy. As the morning progressed toward dinner preparation, the house filled with the familiar scents and sounds of Christmas Day. But underneath the seasonal warmth, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Maya helped where she could, washing dishes and setting serving platters, trying to be useful without getting in the way of the established family rhythms. When Teresa finally called everyone to dinner, Maya felt her stomach clench with anticipation and dread. The dining room table was set with the good china, the centerpiece arranged with Martha Stewart precision, 8 chairs positioned around the oval table with mathematical exactness. Let's see, Teresa said with the particular satisfaction of someone who had been planning this moment. Pastor Hendricks, you'll sit here at the head. David and Jessica, you're there. Lily next to your father. Mother, you're here beside me. Rick and Linda, you take those seats. Maya stood in the doorway, watching the choreography of exclusion play out with devastating precision. 8 chairs. 8 people seated. Her absence from the arrangement was as carefully planned as everything else. And Maya, Teresa continued with the tone of someone offering a generous accommodation, I've set up a lovely spot for you in the garage. The heater's on, and there's that sturdy table your father used for his projects. You'll be quite comfortable. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Maya felt the collective intake of breath, saw David's face go white with shock and shame. Even Pastor Hendricks looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Maya and Teresa as if witnessing something that violated his sense of Christian charity. The garage, Maya repeated, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. It's perfectly warm, Teresa said defensively, as if comfort were the issue rather than the symbolic banishment being performed in front of the extended family and spiritual authority. And you'll have peace and quiet to eat without all the noise in here. Maya looked around the table at the faces of her family, some shocked, some uncomfortable, some carefully neutral. David opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it again, caught between his loyalty to his sister and his lifetime habit of avoiding conflict with their mother. It was Lily who finally spoke, her young voice cutting through the adult paralysis with the clarity of someone too honest to understand why honesty was dangerous. That's mean, Grandma. Aunt Maya should eat with the family. Jessica's hand shot out to grasp her daughter's arm, her voice sharp with warning. Lily, adults are talking. Adults are being cruel, Lily shot back, her eyes bright with tears of frustration and confusion. Why can't Aunt Maya sit at the table like everyone else? Because, Teresa said with the particular authority of someone who had decided that the truth, however ugly, was preferable to pretense. This is a Christian household, and we believe in traditional family values. Some choices have consequences. The silence that followed was profound and poisonous. Maya felt every person in the room measuring the distance between their values and their comfort, between their love and their fear, between who they claimed to be and who they revealed themselves to be in moments of crisis. It's fine, Maya said finally, her voice carrying the hard-won strength of someone who had learned to survive rejection with dignity intact. I'll eat in the garage. Thank you for the accommodation. She gathered her plate and silverware from the kitchen counter where Teresa had set them aside like afterthoughts, walking through the house toward the door that led to the garage. Behind her, she heard the muted sounds of the family settling into their dinner, the low murmur of conversation resuming as they learned to talk around the shape of her absence. The garage door closed behind her with a click that sounded like finality, shutting out the warmth and light of the family gathering, and leaving her alone in the space where her father had once fixed broken things and built small miracles with his hands. But as Maya looked around the garage, at her father's carefully organized tools, at the workbench where he had taught her to build a birdhouse when she was 8, at the corner where he had set up a small television to watch baseball games while he worked, she realized something unexpected. This wasn't exile. This was sanctuary. This was the space where Frank Johnson had reti. The Christmas dinner looked almost elegant here among the carefully organized tools. Her mother's glazed ham, the green bean casserole that had been a family tradition for as long as Maya could remember, mashed potatoes that still steamed in the cold air. From the house, she could hear the muffled sounds of family dinner, conversation and laughter punctuated by the clink of silverware against china. The sounds that should have been including her, but somehow felt more honest for their distance. This was how it had always been, really. Maya sitting slightly apart, watching her family's happiness from the outside, trying to find a way to belong in a space that had never quite been built for her. She pulled out her phone and dialed Sarah's number, needing the comfort of a voice that knew her without explanation or apology. "Hey," Sarah answered on the first ring, the sound of cooking in the background, their chosen family's Christmas. Dinner in progress. "How's it going? Please tell me they're not as bad as you expected." "They banished me to the garage for dinner," Maya said, surprising herself by laughing. "Literally. My mother set up a card table out here like I'm some kind of quarantine risk." Jesus Christ, Maya. What the hell is wrong with these people? Everything, probably. But you know what? I'm okay. Better than okay. It's actually peaceful. Out here. Maya looked around the garage as she spoke, seeing it with new eyes. Her father's presence was everywhere. In the pegboard where he'd hung his tools with obsessive precision, in the coffee can full of screws and washers sorted by size, in the old calendar still turned to March 2021, the month he'd died. This had been his retreat, his creative space, the place where he'd come to think and build and fix the things that could be fixed. "Are you losing your mind?" Sarah asked, with the gentle concern of someone who knew trauma could make people say strange things, because being banished to a garage is not okay, even if the garage is heated. "No, I'm not losing my mind. I'm finding it, maybe." Maya moved to the corner where her father had kept his photo albums, the ones too personal for the house's public displays. "I'm in Dad's workshop. This is where he used to escape when Mom got too much, or when work was hard. He built me a dollhouse in this corner when I was 7. She could almost see it still. The careful craftsmanship, the tiny hinges that actually worked, the miniature shingles he'd cut from real wood. He'd spent months on it, working in the evenings after his shift at the mill, creating something beautiful for the child he'd thought he was raising. "I'm going to murder them all," Sarah said flatly. "I'm going to drive out there and explain to your family exactly what family is supposed to mean." "Don't," Maya said, still laughing. "I mean it. I need to handle this myself. And honestly, this isn't punishment. This is clarity." She opened one of the photo albums, finding pictures she'd never seen before. Her father at work, proud in his hard hat and safety gear. Her parents young and happy at some long-ago church picnic. And there, scattered throughout, pictures of Maya as a child, but different ones than appeared in the house's carefully curated displays. These were the candid shots. Maya at 8, covered in mud from building a fort. Maya at 10, concentrating intensely on a chess game with her father. Maya at 13, having just won the school science fair, her smile wide and genuine and completely unconscious of how the camera might judge her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "He saved all the real pictures out here," Maya murmured, more to herself than to Sarah. "What?" "Dad. He kept photo albums in the garage, pictures of me being myself, not performing. For anybody. Look at this." She held up a photo of herself at 15, hair a mess, wearing one of David's old t-shirts, completely absorbed in reading a book. "I look happy. Really happy." "You were happy," Sarah said gently. "Before you had to learn to hide who you were, before they taught you that your happiness was conditional." Maya felt tears starting and didn't try to stop them. "I keep waiting for them to love me, the real me. But maybe they can't. Maybe they're too scared, or too invested in who they think I should be." "Maybe they are," Sarah agreed. "But that doesn't mean you stop being yourself. That doesn't mean you make yourself smaller to fit their limitations." Through the garage's small window, Maya could see into the dining room where her family sat around the table she'd been excluded from. They looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, Pastor Hendricks saying grace. Everyone's heads bowed in reverent attention, the picture of American family values. But she noticed who was missing from the frame, what had to be edited out to make the picture look right. Maya? Sarah's voice brought her back to the conversation. You still there? Yeah, I'm here. Just watching them through the window. They look so complete without me. Honey, no. They look like people pretending everything is fine when it's not. They look like people who chose comfort over love. And that always leaves a mark. Before Maya could respond, she heard the garage door's side entrance open. She turned to see Lily slipping inside, carrying her own plate and looking around the space with curious eyes. Lily, Maya said, quickly wiping her tears. What are you doing out here? Eating dinner with my aunt, Lily said, with the matter-of-fact determination that Maya was beginning to recognize as her niece's defining characteristic. If they're going to be weird about where you eat, then I'm eating with you. Sweetheart, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Lily settled on another stool, arranging her food on the workbench with the same careful precision Maya had used. This is stupid and mean, and I'm not participating in stupid and mean. Maya felt her heart crack open a little wider, making room for this fierce, brave young person who had somehow learned to choose love over fear, despite being raised in a house where fear seemed to win more often than not. Sarah, Maya said into the phone, I have to go. My niece just joined me in exile. Good. Hold on to that one. She sounds like she's got her head on straight. After ending the call, Maya looked at Lily, who was methodically eating her way through the same Christmas dinner everyone else was enjoying, but making it look like an act of rebellion rather than banishment. Your parents are going to be furious, Maya said. Probably. But they're already furious about everything else. So what's one more thing? Lily took a bite of ham and looked around the garage. This is actually kinda cool. Grandpa Frank spent a lot of time out here, didn't he? He did. This was his workshop, his thinking space. Mom never talks about him much, says it's too painful. But I remember him better than she thinks I do. Lily's voice took on the particular softness that came with precious memories. He used to let me help him with projects sometimes. Said I had good hands for detail work. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the garage feeling less like exile and more like conspiracy. Maya found herself studying this young person who shared her blood, but seemed to have inherited something different. A willingness to question, to choose her own values over inherited ones. Lily, Maya said carefully, can I ask you something? Yeah. Why are you really out here? I mean, I'm grateful for the company, but this is going to cause problems for you at home. Lily set down her fork and looked directly at Maya with eyes that held surprising depth for someone her age. Because you're my aunt and you're eating Christmas dinner alone in a garage, and that's not okay. Because my parents are acting like your transition is something that happened to them instead of something that happened to you. And because... She trailed off, looking uncertain for the first time since entering the garage. Because what? Maya prompted gently. Because I've been messaging you online for months, and you probably don't know it's me. The words hit Maya like a gentle earthquake, rearranging everything she thought she understood about this situation. She stared at her niece, seeing suddenly the intelligence and curiosity that had been reaching out across digital space, asking questions about identity and belonging and the courage required to live authentically. Your questions in the night, Maya said slowly. Lily nodded, her cheeks flushing pink. I made up the username when I started researching. Things. Gender things. Identity things. Questions I couldn't ask anybody here. Maya felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The thoughtful questions that had appeared in her inbox over the past several months, the obvious intelligence behind them. The growing sense of urgency as the person behind the screen struggled with questions that couldn't be answered by Google searches or Wikipedia articles. Lily, Maya said softly. What kind of questions? The kind that would make my parents panic. Lily's voice was steady, but Maya could see the fear underneath the bravery. Questions about what it means to be yourself when yourself doesn't match what everyone expects. Questions about whether it's possible to be happy when you feel like you're living someone else's life. The garage felt suddenly full of possibility and danger, of secrets that could change everything or destroy everything depending on how they were handled. Maya looked at this brave, questioning young person and saw herself at 16, desperate for answers, hungry for someone who understood, terrified of what might happen if the questions were voiced aloud. "How long have you been questioning?" Maya asked. "Honestly? Forever. But seriously? Since I was about 13. I kept thinking it would pass, that I'd grow out of it or figure out how to be normal, but it's getting stronger, not weaker." Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a cloak. This wasn't just about her own homecoming anymore. This was about a young person who needed guidance and support, who had been reaching out in the only way available to them, who had chosen to sit in a garage rather than participate in the rejection of the one adult who might understand their struggle. "What are you questioning specifically?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew. Lily was quiet for a long moment, gathering courage for words that couldn't be taken back once they were spoken. "Whether I'm really a girl? Whether the name Lily fits who I am inside? Whether there's a way to be myself without destroying my family?" The last question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the pain and possibility that Maya knew so well. She looked at her niece, or perhaps nephew, or perhaps something else entirely, and felt the peculiar mixture of heartbreak and hope that came with recognizing yourself in someone else's struggle. Outside, snow continued to fall, and inside, the house, the family dinner continued without them. But here in the garage, surrounded by tools for building and fixing and creating, two people who had been excluded from the family's definition of normal began the slow work of building something new. "Let's start with the easy questions," Maya said, reaching across the workbench to squeeze Lily's hand. "And then we'll work our way up to the hard ones. But I want you to know, whatever you're questioning, whatever you discover about yourself, you're not alone." Lily's smile was watery but radiant, the expression of someone who had been carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear, and had finally found someone willing to help with the weight. "Thank you," Lily whispered. "I've been so scared and so alone with this." "Not anymore," Maya said firmly. "We're family, real family, the kin." "Not anymore," Maya said firmly. "We're family, real family, the kind that shows up when it matters." Over the next 3 days, the garage became their sanctuary. Each morning, Lily would slip out after breakfast, ostensibly to get some fresh air or help with chores, but really to continue the conversations that had become the most important part of both their days. Maya found herself looking forward to these stolen hours with an intensity that surprised her. The relief of being needed, of being useful in a way that felt genuinely meaningful. The workbench had become their conference table, scattered with printouts Maya had carefully researched on her phone during the late-night hours when the house was quiet. Articles about gender identity, stories from other trans and questioning youth, resources for family support that felt both hopeful and impossibly distant from their current reality. "I've been reading about non-binary identities," Lily said. On the second day, their voice careful as they tested out new vocabulary. "People who don't fit into either boy or girl categories. Is that a real thing or just something people made up?" Maya looked at this brave young person who was exploring the landscape of their own identity, with the same methodical approach they brought to everything else. Homework, art projects, the careful navigation of family dynamics that had shaped their survival skills. "It's very real," Maya said. "Gender isn't binary for a lot of people. Some cultures have recognized that for thousands of years, they have words and roles for people who exist outside the boy-girl framework. But not here, not in Millbrook." Lily's observation carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how far their small town was from accepting anything that challenged traditional expectations. "Not yet," Maya agreed. "But that doesn't make your feelings less valid. Your identity isn't determined by your zip code or your family's comfort level." Lily picked up one of the printed articles, a story about a teenager whose parents had initially struggled but eventually became advocates for their child's authentic self. Do you think Dad would understand if I told him?" Maya considered the question carefully. David had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and avoided confrontation. But she'd also seen glimpses of something deeper in him, a fundamental decency that might, under the right circumstances, overcome his conflict avoidance tendencies. "I think your dad loves you more than he fears change," Maya said slowly. "But I also think he's scared of what it might cost him to support you. His marriage, his standing in the community, his relationship with your mom." "What about Mom?" The question was quieter, carrying less hope. Maya felt her heart break a little. For this young person, who was already learning to calibrate their honesty against the likelihood of acceptance, your mother is harder to predict. She's invested in a particular version of who she thinks you should be. Sometimes people can grow beyond that, but sometimes they can't. They worked through identity terminology, discussing the differences between gender identity and sexual orientation, between social transition and medical transition, between the labels that could be helpful and the ones that could become prisons of their own. Lily was hungry for information, asking questions with the intensity of someone who had been starving for understanding. "I keep a journal," Lily admitted on the third day, pulling a small notebook from their jacket pocket. "I write letters to myself as different names, different versions of who I might be. Can you tell me about them?" Lily's face lit up with the particular joy that came with being invited to share something precious. "There's Alex. That feels strong and sure, like someone who knows exactly who they are. And River. That feels fluid, like someone who doesn't need to be locked into one thing forever. And Sam. That feels safe, like a name that could belong to anyone." Maya listened to the careful way Lily spoke about each potential identity, hearing the hope and fear woven together in every syllable. This was sacred work, the exploration of self that every person deserved to do with support and safety, but that too many had to navigate alone. "Have you tried any of them out? Asked anyone to use different pronouns? Online sometimes, in gaming communities where nobody knows me. It feels..." Lily searched for words. "It feels like trying on clothes that actually fit for the first time." The garage door opened suddenly, cutting through their conversation like a knife. Both Maya and Lily tensed, expecting Jessica or Teresa, but it was David who stepped inside, his face showing the particular strain of someone who had been building up courage for an uncomfortable conversation. "Hey," he said, looking between them with obvious uncertainty. "Mind if I join you? The house is getting a little, intense." Maya and Lily exchanged a quick look, a moment of silent communication about secrets and safety and the risks of inclusion. Finally, Lily nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course," Maya said. "Pull up a stool." David settled himself at the workbench, his eyes taking in the scattered articles and printouts with growing comprehension. "You two have been having some serious conversations out here." "Dad," Lily started, their voice carrying the particular tension of someone about to make a dangerous confession. "It's okay," David said quickly. "I'm not here to interrogate anyone. I'm here because..." He paused, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Maya remembered from their childhood. "Because I keep thinking about Christmas dinner. About watching you eat alone out here while we sat in the dining room pretending everything was normal." "It wasn't your fault," Maya said. "Wasn't it? I sat there and let Mom banish you to the garage. I didn't stand up for you. Didn't challenge what was happening. I chose the easy path, and I've been hating myself for it ever since." The honesty in his voice was raw and uncomfortable, the sound of someone confronting their own moral failures without the comfort of justification or excuse. "What changed?" Lily asked. David looked at his child with an expression that carried years of accumulated love and worry. "You did. Watching you choose to sit out here with Maya. Watching you stand up for what's right when I couldn't. I realized I've been teaching you the wrong lesson, that keeping peace is more important than standing up for family." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she'd been carrying since the moment she'd arrived home. This wasn't acceptance yet, but it was the beginning of courage. And sometimes courage was more valuable than acceptance because it could grow into something larger. "Dad," Lily said, their voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to reveal. "I need to tell you something. About me. About who I am." David's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, concern, calculation, and finally, a kind of determined calm that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment without fully realizing it. "I'm listening," he said simply. "I don't think I'm a girl. Not the way everyone expects me to be. I've been questioning my gender identity, researching and exploring and trying to understand who I really am." The words hung in the garage air, like smoke, visible and undeniable. Maya watched David's face, seeing him process this information against everything he thought he knew about his child, everything he'd been taught about gender and family, and the way the world was supposed to work. "How long have you been questioning?" he asked finally, his voice careful but not rejecting. "Years. But seriously, for about 3 years. I've been messaging Maya online, asking for advice and guidance." David's eyes flicked to Maya, understanding, dawning across his features. "That's why you came home. Not just for Christmas, for Lily." "No," Maya said firmly. "I came home for me. For the chance to reconcile with my family. But Lily needing support. That's become just as important." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the scattered articles on the workbench. Maya could see him working through the implications, not just for Lily, but for his marriage, his community standing, his relationship with his mother and the church that had shaped so much of his worldview. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally, looking directly at Lily. The question was perfect in its simplicity, cutting through all the complexity to focus on what mattered most. Not David's comfort or understanding, but his child's needs. "I need you to listen when I talk about this. I need you to use whatever name and pronouns feel right to me, even if it's confusing at first. And I need you to protect me from Mom when she finds out. Because she's going to find out eventually." "When she finds out?" David's voice carried the recognition that this wasn't an if but a when, that secrets this large had their own momentum. "She's already suspicious," Lily admitted. "She's been monitoring my internet usage, checking my phone when she thinks I'm asleep. She knows I've been talking to Maya online, and she's not happy about it." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garage's temperature. Jessica's surveillance of her child's communications felt like a violation, but also like a warning about how far she might go to maintain control over Lily's development. "How much does she know?" Maya asked. "Not everything, but enough to be worried. She keeps asking if you've been influencing me, if you've been putting ideas in my head." David's jaw tightened with what looked like anger. "You're not some blank slate waiting to be influenced. You're a person with your own thoughts and feelings and identity." The words were fierce and protective, and Maya felt a surge of hope for this family that was slowly learning to choose love over fear, understanding over control. "Dad," Lily said softly, "there's something else. I want to try using they-them pronouns for a while. See how that feels." "Okay," David said without hesitation. "They-them. I'll probably mess up sometimes while I'm learning, but I'll try. And maybe the name Sam? Just to try it out?" David's smile was watery but genuine. "Hi, Sam. It's nice to meet you." The moment was tender and transformative, a parent choosing to follow their child into unknown territory rather than demanding the child conform to familiar expectations. Maya felt tears starting and didn't try to stop them. But even as they celebrated this small victory, the garage door opened again, and this time it was Jessica who stepped inside, her face white with fury, and her phone clutched in her hand like evidence. "I want to see what you two have been filling my daughter's head with," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Now, I want to see what you two have been filling my daughter's head with," Jessica said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Now." The garage fell silent except for the hum of the space heater and the distant sound of wind rattling the windows. Maya felt the temperature drop in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. The particular cold that came when long simmering tensions finally boiled over into open conflict. Jessica's eyes swept across the workbench, taking in the scattered articles about gender identity, the printouts about family support resources, the notebook where Lily had been exploring different names and pronouns. Her face grew paler with each piece of evidence, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Jessica," David said carefully, rising from his stool with the measured movements of someone trying not to startle a dangerous animal. "Let's talk about this calmly." "Calmly?" Jessica's voice pitched higher, the careful control she'd maintained for days finally cracking. "I find out my daughter has been sneaking around behind my back, having secret conversations about God knows what. And you want me to be calm?" She waved her phone in the air like a weapon. "I've been monitoring her internet activity, David. Do you know what I found? Months of messages to your sister about gender confusion, about questioning identity, about feeling like she's trapped in the wrong body." Maya watched Lily, Sam, shrink into themselves, the brave young person who had been exploring their identity with such courage, suddenly looking very much like a frightened child, caught in the middle of adult anger they had no power to control. "Mom," Sam said quietly, "we were just talking." "Talking?" Jessica's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Is that what you call this corruption? This systematic poisoning of a child's mind with deviant ideology?" The word deviant hit the garage like a physical blow. Maya felt her own anger rising, the protective fury that came from watching someone attack a vulnerable young person who was doing nothing more than trying to understand themselves. "Jessica," Maya said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years advocating for at-risk youth. Sam was asking questions that needed answers. They were struggling with identity issues and needed support. "Sam?" Jessica's voice went dangerously quiet. "You've even convinced her to change her name? To reject the identity God gave her?" "Nobody gave me this identity," Sam said, their voice growing stronger despite the fear in their eyes. "I'm trying to figure out who I am. And Maya has been helping me understand that questioning is normal and healthy." "Questioning is not healthy," Jessica snapped. "Questioning leads to confusion, and confusion leads to poor choices that destroy families and communities. I've seen what happens when children are exposed to this gender ideology nonsense." David stepped between his wife and child, his own anger finally breaking through years of careful diplomacy. "Jess, this is our kid, our child. They're not some abstract political issue. They're a real person with real feelings that deserve respect." "They?" Jessica's eyes narrowed as she processed David's pronoun choice. "Oh my God, David. Tell me you haven't bought into this insanity too." "I've bought into loving my child unconditionally," David said firmly. "I've bought into listening when they talk to me, instead of trying to control what they think and feel." The garage felt like a powder keg, with multiple fuses burning toward inevitable explosion. Maya could see the family fracturing in real time, years of careful balance coming apart as everyone was forced to choose sides in a conflict that allowed no middle ground. "This ends now," Jessica announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. "Lily, you're coming home with me immediately. You're not to have any further contact with Maya, online or in person." "Her name is Sam," Maya said quietly, but with enough steel in her voice to make Jessica's head snap toward her. "And they're not a possession to be controlled." "Don't you dare tell me how to parent my child," Jessica snarled. "You've done enough damage already. Coming here with your agenda, your propaganda, corrupting an innocent teenager with your sick ideas about gender and identity." The words were designed to wound, to reduce Maya's entire existence to a political position, rather than a human reality. But Maya had heard worse from people who mattered less, and she found herself feeling not hurt, but oddly calm. "I didn't corrupt anyone," Maya said evenly. "I answered questions from a young person who was struggling with identity issues and had nowhere else to turn. I provided support and resources to someone who needed them." "Support?" Jessica's voice dripped with disgust. "You call this support? Convincing a confused teenager to reject their biological reality? To embrace mental illness as identity? Mom, stop." Sam's voice cut through the adult argument with the particular pain of someone watching their parents destroy each other over their very existence. "Please stop saying horrible things about Maya. She didn't make me question anything. I've been questioning since I was 13. "You were 13 when Maya transitioned," Jessica said, as if this proved some grand conspiracy. "Don't you see the connection? The timing isn't coincidental." "The timing is coincidental," David said, his voice tight with frustration. Sam has been questioning for years, long before Maya came back into our lives. Jessica whirled on her husband, her fury finding a new target. How long have you known? How long have you been keeping this from me? The question hung in the air like an accusation of betrayal. And Maya watched David's face as he realized there was no answer that wouldn't make things worse. Either he'd known and hidden it, making him complicit in deception, or he hadn't known, making him blind to his own child's struggles. I suspected, he said finally. Sam's been asking questions, seeming unhappy in ways I couldn't quite understand. But I didn't know how to help, didn't know what resources were available. So you turned to her? Jessica gestured toward Maya with contempt. Instead of talking to me, instead of talking to Pastor Hendricks, instead of seeking appropriate guidance from people who share our values? What values? Sam exploded, their teenage emotions finally overwhelming their caution. Values that say I'm not allowed to be myself? Values that say questioning is wrong and conformity is the only acceptable choice? What kind of values are those? The garage went silent except for the sound of everyone breathing hard. The aftermath of much truth spoken too quickly. Maya could see the moment when Jessica made her final calculation, when she decided that love with conditions was better than no control at all. We're leaving, Jessica announced, grabbing Sam's arm with enough force to make them wince. You're coming home with me right now, and tomorrow we're driving to Columbus to see Dr. Patterson. Who's Dr. Patterson? Maya asked, though something in Jessica's tone made her stomach clench with dread. A therapist who specializes in helping confused teenagers overcome gender dysphoria and return to their biological identity, Jessica said with the satisfaction of someone who had found the perfect solution to an inconvenient problem. Maya felt ice form in her veins. You're talking about conversion therapy. I'm talking about professional help for a child who has been systematically confused by outside influences, Jessica snapped. Dr. Patterson has excellent success rates in helping young people accept their God-given gender and move past these unhealthy fixations. Mom, no. Sam's voice was small but desperate. Please don't make me do that. Please. Maya had heard the horror stories, LGBTQ+ youth subjected to conversion therapy, emerging damaged and traumatized, their suicide rates skyrocketing after being told that their authentic selves were diseased and wrong. The thought of Sam being subjected to that kind of systematic psychological abuse made her feel physically sick. Jessica, David said, his voice carrying a warning that Maya had never heard from her brother before. We are not putting our child through conversion therapy. Our child? Jessica's laugh was harsh and bitter. When did you start thinking of this as our decision? I'm her mother, David. I know what's best for her. Their mother, David corrected firmly. And what's best for them is love and support, not therapy designed to make them hate themselves. The pronoun correction was the final straw. Jessica's face went white with rage, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling under the weight of her family's refusal to conform to her expectations. Fine, she said, her voice deadly quiet. You want to choose your sick sister and your confused daughter over your wife and your marriage? You want to destroy our family for the sake of political correctness and sexual deviance? Then you can live with the consequences. She released Sam's arm and stepped back, her decision made. I'm taking Lily to my mother's house tonight. Tomorrow we're driving to Columbus for professional help. And if you try to stop me, David, I'll file for divorce and custody. I'll make sure a judge knows that you've been exposing our daughter to inappropriate sexual content and allowing an unstable influence to corrupt her thinking. The threat hung in the garage like poison gas, toxic and suffocating. Maya realized with crystal clarity that Jessica wasn't just angry. She was scared, terrified that her carefully controlled world was spinning beyond her ability to manage it. You can't force conversion therapy on a minor in Ohio, Maya said quietly. It's been restricted by state law. Jessica's smile was cold and triumphant. Dr. Patterson doesn't call it conversion therapy. He calls it family counseling and identity clarification therapy. Perfectly legal, perfectly ethical, according to his licensing board. Maya felt her heart break for Sam, who was caught in the middle of this adult war over their very right to exist. The brave young person who had been exploring their identity with such courage was being reduced to a battlefield, their authentic self treated as territory to be won or lost. Sam, Maya said softly. You don't have to go. You're 16, old enough to have a voice in your own treatment decisions. Not if her mother has custody, Jessica said with satisfaction, which I do and which I will continue to have as long as David insists on prioritizing his family's mental illness over his family's well-being. The garage door opened again, and Teresa entered like the final piece of a destructive puzzle falling into place. She took in the scene, the scattered articles, the tears on everyone's faces, the obvious signs of family crisis, with the particular satisfaction of someone whose predictions had been proven correct. I told you this would happen, she said, to David, her voice carrying the authority of maternal disappointment. I told you that bringing Michael back into this family would cause nothing but trouble and division. Maya, David corrected automatically, but his voice lacked the strength it had carried just moments before. Michael, Teresa repeated firmly. And now look what's happened. Jessica's right to be concerned about Lily's well-being. This gender confusion nonsense is exactly the kind of influence we were trying to protect her from. Maya looked around, the garage at the faces of her family, Jessica rigid with righteous fury, Teresa vindicated in her rejection, Sam desperate and trapped, David torn between competing loyalties that seemed impossible to reconcile. This was the moment she'd been dreading and expecting since the day she'd decided to come home. The moment when love wasn't enough, when acceptance couldn't be earned through patience or explanation, or the desperate hope that family bonds might prove stronger than fear. I think, Maya said quietly, gathering the scattered articles from the workbench. I should probably go. Maya, no, Sam said, tears streaming down their face. Please don't leave me alone with this. The plea broke Maya's heart, but she could see the impossible position she'd been placed in. Her presence had become the catalyst for a family war that threatened to destroy the very people she'd hoped to protect. I'm not leaving you alone, Maya said firmly. I'm giving your family space to figure out what they really value. But Sam, remember what we talked about. Remember that you're not alone, and you're not broken, and there are people who will love and support you exactly as you are. As Maya gathered her things and prepared to leave the garage that had become both sanctuary and battleground, she realized that coming home hadn't been about earning acceptance after all. It had been about learning who deserved to be part of her real family, and who didn't. It had been about learning who deserved to be part of her real family, and who didn't. Maya spent that night in the Millbrook Motor Lodge, a modest establishment, on the edge of town that catered mostly to traveling salesmen and families visiting relatives who didn't have guest rooms. The room smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and carried the particular loneliness that came with fluorescent lighting and thin walls. But it felt safer than the house where her presence had become a catalyst for family destruction. She sat, on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at her phone and trying to decide whether to book a flight back to Portland or stay and fight for Sam's right to be themselves. The smart choice was obvious. Extract herself from a situation that was causing more harm than good. Return to her chosen family and the work that actually made a difference. But every time she started to search for flights, she thought about Sam's desperate plea, please don't leave me alone with this. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How are you holding up? Do I need to stage a rescue mission? Maya typed back, family imploded. Jessica wants to put Sam through conversion therapy. I'm at a motel trying to figure out what to do. The response came immediately. Jesus Christ, are you safe? Is the kid safe? For now. Jessica took them to her mother's house for the night. David's caught in the middle. I don't know how much he'll actually fight for Sam when it comes down to choosing between his child and his marriage. Maya's phone rang, Sarah's name appearing on the screen. You can't leave that kid to face this alone, Sarah said without preamble. Conversion therapy is psychological torture. The suicide rates for kids who go through that shit. I know. The statistics, Maya said wearily. But my being here is making it worse. Jessica's using my presence as evidence that Sam is being corrupted by outside influences. Your presence isn't the problem. Their bigotry is the problem. Don't let them make you responsible for their failures. Before Maya could respond, a knock on her motel room door made her freeze. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the thought of Jessica or Teresa tracking her down to continue the confrontation made her stomach clench. Someone's at the door, she whispered to Sarah. Be careful. Don't open it unless you know who it is. Maya approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a figure she didn't immediately recognize. An elderly woman with silver hair and a determined expression, holding what looked like a casserole dish. "Mrs. Johnson?" the voice called through the door. "It's Margaret Wilson, your grandmother. I brought you some dinner." Maya opened the door to find Nana standing in the motel corridor, her coat buttoned against the winter cold, her eyes sharp, with purpose and something that looked like barely contained fury. "Nana, how did you know I was here?" "Honey, this is Millbrook. There are exactly 3 places to stay in this town, and Jake Morrison saw you checking in here this afternoon." Nana pushed past Maya into the room, setting the casserole dish on the small table and looking around with the critical eye of someone who had strong opinions about hospitality. "This place is a disgrace. No granddaughter of mine should be staying in a motel when there's family in town." "Apparently there isn't family in town," Maya said, closing the door and trying to process this unexpected visit. "At least, not family that wants me around." Nana turned to face her, and Maya was surprised to see tears in the older woman's eyes. "There's me. There's David, when he finds his backbone. And there's that brave grandchild of mine who's been asking questions that apparently terrified the adults into acting like complete fools." Maya sank into the room's single chair, feeling exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the past few hours. "Jessica wants to put Sam through conversion therapy. She thinks I've corrupted them with gender ideology." "Jessica thinks a lot of things that would embarrass a reasonable person," Nana said with the particular scorn she reserved for ideas too stupid to merit serious consideration. "That girl has been convinced since college that the world is divided into good Christians and everyone else, and that her job is to protect her family from contamination by different ideas. And Teresa agrees with her." Nana's expression grew complicated, mixing disappointment with something that might have been grief. "Your mother is scared, honey. Frank's death broke something in her, made her grab onto rules and certainties because the world felt too dangerous without them. She's not evil, just diminished, smaller than she used to be." The assessment was generous, but realistic, acknowledging Teresa's pain without excusing her cruelty. Maya felt some of her anger shifting into something more complex. Not forgiveness, but understanding of the fear that drove rejection. "It doesn't matter why she's doing it," Maya said. "What matters is that Sam is caught in the middle, about to be subjected to psychological abuse because their family can't handle the possibility that gender might be more complicated than they thought." Nana settled into the room's other chair, her movements careful but determined. "Tell me about Sam. About what they've been going through." For the next hour, Maya shared the conversations she'd had with her niece. Their months of online correspondence, their exploration of identity and pronouns, their growing confidence in understanding themselves despite the hostile environment they were navigating. Nana listened with the particular attention of someone who had lived through enough change to understand that adaptation was a survival skill. "You know," Nana said when Maya finished, "this family has seen different kinds of people before. We've just learned to forget the stories that don't fit our current version of normal." "What do you mean?" Nana's eyes took on the distant quality that came with accessing long-buried memories. "Your great-uncle Robert, Frank's younger brother. Never married, lived with his roommate Charlie for 40 years. Everyone knew what they were to each other, but nobody talked about it because it was easier to pretend they were just good friends who happened to share a house." Maya stared at her grandmother, feeling pieces of family history clicking into place. "Uncle Bob was gay? As a $3 bill, and Charlie was the sweetest man you'd ever want to meet. They ran the hardware store together, took care of Frank's parents when they got old, showed up for every family gathering with food and presents, and more love than most married couples manage." Nana's voice carried the weight of old regret. "But we called Charlie Uncle Bob's friend because it was easier than admitting our family included people who didn't fit the church's ideas about acceptable love." The revelation hit Maya like a gentle earthquake, reshaping her understanding of family history and possibility. What happened to them? Charlie died first, heart attack at 67. Bob followed 6 months later. "Grief," the doctor said, but I think it was loneliness. 40 years together, and Charlie couldn't even be acknowledged as Bob's partner at the funeral. Had to sit in the back like a family friend while Bob's blood relatives made all the decisions. Nana's eyes met Maya's, carrying decades of accumulated wisdom about the cost of family silence. I swore then that I'd never let love be unnamed in this family again. Never let fear make us pretend that someone we loved didn't exist. Before Maya could respond, another knock interrupted them. This time it was Jake Morrison, his beard damp with snow, his expression carrying the particular urgency of someone with important news to share. "Jake," Maya said, opening the door. "What are you doing here? Heard you were staying at the motel. Thought you might want to know. David's been driving around town for the past hour looking for you. He seemed pretty upset." Maya felt her heart clench with worry. "Is Sam okay?" "Far as I know. But Jessica took the kid to her mother's place. And word is, she's planning to drive to Columbus tomorrow for some kind of therapy appointment." Jake stepped inside, nodding respectfully to Nana before continuing. "Look, Maya, I know this isn't my business, but I wanted you to know, not everyone in this town thinks your family's handling this right. There are people who remember you as a good kid who deserved better." The words were simple but powerful, a reminder that community could exist beyond the narrow boundaries of blood family. Maya felt tears starting, overwhelmed by the unexpected. Support from people she'd assumed had written her off years ago. "There's something else," Jake continued, pulling out his phone. "Pastor Hendricks has been asking around about you. Not in a bad way. More like he's trying to understand something. He stopped by the garage this afternoon asking if I knew how to reach you." "Pastor Hendricks wants to talk to me?" "Said he had some things to discuss. About family and faith and what it means to love people unconditionally." Jake's expression suggested he was as surprised by the pastor's interest as Maya was. Might be worth hearing what he has to say. As if summoned by their conversation, Maya's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and she answered with a mixture of hope and dread. "Maya, thank God. Where are you? I've been looking." "Everywhere. I'm at the motor lodge, with Nana and Jake. Can I come over? I need to talk to you. About Sam, about Jessica, about what happens next." 20 minutes later, David arrived looking like he'd aged a decade in a single day. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red with exhaustion and stress. His usually careful composure completely shattered. "I'm sorry," he said as soon as Maya opened the door. "I'm so fucking sorry for all of it. For Mom's behavior, for letting Jessica terrorize Sam, for not standing up when it mattered." He collapsed into the remaining chair, his head in his hands. "Jessica gave me an ultimatum. Support her decision about the conversion therapy, or she files for divorce and custody. Claims I'm an unfit parent for exposing Sam to inappropriate influences." "What did you tell her?" Nana asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that this moment would define David's character for the rest of his life. David looked up, his eyes meeting Maya's with a determination she hadn't seen since they were children. "I told her that our child's well-being is more important than our marriage. I told her that love doesn't come with conditions, and family doesn't get to pick and choose which parts of each other to accept." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a door opening that she'd thought had been permanently sealed. "And then what happened?" "She left, took Sam to her mother's house and said she'd be filing papers Monday morning." David's voice broke, slightly. "But she also said something else. She said if I change my mind, if I come to my senses and support her position, she might be willing to work things out." The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. David was being offered a way back to his comfortable life, his stable marriage, his position in the community. All he had to do was abandon his child's authentic self and his sister's right to exist as family. "What are you going to do?" Maya asked quietly. David's smile was watery but genuine, carrying the particular relief that came with finally choosing courage over comfort. "I'm going to fight for my kid. And I'm going to ask my sister to help me figure out how." Outside the motel window, snow continued to fall on Millbrook, Ohio, covering the familiar streets with a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. And inside room 12 of the motor lodge, 4 people who had never expected to be allies began planning a battle for a young person's right to be themselves. The war for Sam's future was just beginning. But for the first time since coming home, Maya felt like she might not be fighting it alone. The war for Sam's future was just beginning. But for the first time since coming home, Maya felt like she might not be fighting it alone. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of persistent snow that made driving treacherous and gave everyone an excuse to stay home and think. Maya woke in the motel room feeling more rested than she had since arriving in Millbrook, despite, or perhaps because of, the fact that her family had officially imploded, and she was now persona non grata in her childhood home. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from David, 2 text messages, and 1 voicemail that simply said, "Emergency family meeting, Nana's house. 9 a.m. Pastor Hendricks is coming too." Maya checked the time, 8:30 a.m. Just enough time to shower, grab coffee from the motel's dubious breakfast spread, and drive to her grandmother's house for what promised to be either a reconciliation or a final declaration of war. Nana Wilson lived in a small craftsman bungalow on Elm Street, the house she'd shared with Maya's grandfather until his death 15 years earlier. The front porch held 2 rocking chairs that had weathered decades of Ohio seasons, and the yard was planted with the kind of practical perennials that came back every year without requiring much attention. It was the house where Maya had spent countless afternoons as a child, learning to play chess and listening to stories about family members who had died before she was born. Now, it felt like a neutral territory in a war she'd never wanted to fight. David's car was already in the driveway, along with Pastor Hendricks's sedan and Jake Morrison's pickup truck. Maya sat in her rental car for a moment, gathering courage for what felt like the most important conversation of her life. Not just about her place in the family, but about Sam's future and the kind of love they deserved to receive. She found them gathered in Nana's living room, a space that had always felt like a sanctuary from the complications of the adult world. The furniture was comfortable but not fancy, chosen for durability rather than style. Family photos covered every available surface, pictures spanning decades, showing births and graduations and weddings, the visual record of a family that had survived depression and war and all the smaller crises that shaped ordinary lives. Pastor Hendricks stood when Maya entered, extending his hand with the careful courtesy of someone who had spent the night reconsidering his previous assumptions. "Maya, thank you for coming. I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For sitting silent at Christmas dinner when your mother banished you to the garage. For allowing theological doctrine to override basic human decency. For failing in my pastoral duty to love and protect all of God's children." The words were unexpected in their directness, cutting through the careful diplomatic language Maya had learned to expect from religious leaders. She studied Pastor Hendrick's face, looking for the performance of contrition that often masked unchanged beliefs but found only genuine regret and something that looked like hard-won understanding. "What changed your mind?" Maya asked. "Several things. First, watching a 16-year-old show more courage and compassion than the adults in the room. Second, spending yesterday evening researching what actual medical and psychological experts say about gender identity and transition care." Pastor Hendricks moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. "And third, spending most of last night in prayer, asking God to help me understand the difference between loving people and controlling them." Jake Morrison was sitting on Nana's sofa, still wearing his work clothes from the garage, his presence a reminder that this conversation included people beyond the immediate family crisis. "Pastor asked me to be here as a witness," he said. "Someone who grew up with you and David, who remembers what kind of people you were before everything got complicated." "And what kind of people were we?" Maya asked, settling into the chair. That had been her grandfather's. "Good ones," Jake said simply. "You stood up for kids who got picked on. David shared his lunch with anyone who forgot theirs. You both learned to see people as individuals instead of categories. Somewhere along the way, some of the adults forgot those lessons." David emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee mugs, his movements careful and deliberate. He looked like he'd slept about as well as Maya had, which was to say not much, but his expression carried a determination that reminded her of their father's face when he'd made up his mind about something important. "Before we start," David said, distributing coffee with the automatic hospitality that had been trained into them since childhood, "I need to update everyone on the situation with Sam." Maya felt her stomach clench. "Are they okay?" "For now. I drove to Jessica's mother's house this morning, demanded to see my child. Jessica tried to refuse, but Mrs. Patterson, Jessica's mother, overruled her. Said family disputes shouldn't involve keeping parents away from their children. Did you get to talk to Sam? David's smile was complicated, mixing relief with ongoing worry. I did. They're scared, but okay. Jessica has an appointment scheduled with Dr. Patterson in Columbus this afternoon, but Sam doesn't want to go. They asked me to help them refuse treatment they don't want. Can you legally do that? Pastor Hendricks asked. That's where it gets complicated, David said, settling into his own chair. Jessica has primary custody, not because of any legal decision, but because I've always worked longer hours, and she's been the primary caregiver. If she wants to pursue therapy for Sam, she has legal authority to do so unless I can prove it's harmful. Conversion therapy is harmful, Maya said flatly. The research is clear. The research is clear to us, David corrected. But Dr. Patterson doesn't call it conversion therapy. He calls it family counseling and identity clarification therapy. Technically legal, hard to challenge without a lengthy court battle that Sam would have to endure while the case was pending. Nana had been listening with the patient attention of someone who had survived enough family crises to understand the importance of getting all the information before making decisions. What's your plan, David? That's why we're here. I need help figuring out how to protect Sam without making things worse. And I need to understand what everyone in this room is willing to risk to help me do it. The question hung in the air, like a challenge, an invitation to choose sides in a conflict that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Maya looked around the room at these unexpected allies. Her grandmother, her childhood friend, the pastor who had overcome his theological training to choose love over doctrine, and her brother who was finally finding the courage to fight for what mattered most. I'm in, Maya said simply. Whatever Sam needs, whatever it costs. Same here, Jake said. I've got a teenage daughter of my own. Can't imagine forcing her into therapy designed to make her hate herself. Pastor Hendricks was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of his choice. My position in the church. If I'm seen as openly supporting what the congregation considers a lifestyle choice, I could lose my job. And if you don't support a child's right to be themselves, Nana said with the particular sharpness she reserved for moral cowardice, you'll lose your soul. I'm in, Pastor Hendricks said finally. But I need to be strategic about how I approach this. Work within the system rather than openly defying it. David pulled out his phone, checking the time with visible anxiety. Jessica's planning to leave for Columbus at noon. That gives us about 2 hours to figure out how to stop her, or at least give Sam some protection if they have to go. What if Sam just refuses? Maya asked. They're 16, old enough to have a voice in their own treatment decisions. Jessica's threatening to call it defiance and rebellion, symptoms of the gender confusion that proves Sam needs professional intervention, David said. She's got Dr. Patterson primed to see any resistance as evidence that the therapy is necessary. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the catch-22 that trapped so many LGBTQ+ youth. Resist harmful treatment and be labeled as mentally unstable. Submit to it and risk psychological damage that could last a lifetime. What if, Nana said slowly, Sam wasn't available to go to Columbus? Everyone turned to look at her, recognizing the tone that had once convinced Maya and David to build a fort in the backyard instead of doing their homework. The voice of someone who was about to suggest something technically legal but definitely subversive. What do you mean? David asked. I mean, what if Sam was visiting their great-grandmother for the day, learning about family history, spending time with an elderly relative who might not have many years left? Nana's eyes sparkled with mischief. Hard for Jessica to object to that kind of wholesome family activity. You want to kidnap Sam? Maya asked, though she was already considering the logistics. I want to give Sam a choice, Nana corrected. Let them spend the day here, with family who loves them unconditionally, while the adults figure out a longer-term solution that doesn't involve psychological abuse disguised as therapy. David ran his hands through his hair, clearly torn between his protective instincts and his lifetime habit of following rules. If Jessica finds out we're deliberately interfering with her custody decisions, she can file complaints all she wants, Nana said firmly. But last I checked, grandmothers were still allowed to invite their great-grandchildren for visits, especially when those children are going through difficult times and need extra family support. Pastor Hendricks leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. There might be another angle. If I were to express concern about the family's spiritual well-being, suggest that major decisions about Sam's care should be made with pastoral guidance and family counseling first. You could buy us time, Maya realized. Exactly. Request a meeting with all the parents before any outside therapy begins. Give everyone a chance to explore alternatives that keep the family together rather than driving it apart. Jake checked his watch. If we're going to do this, we need to move fast. Maya, can you pick up Sam? You're the one they trust most right now. What about Jessica? Leave Jessica to me, David said, his voice carrying a new authority that Maya hadn't heard before. I'm going to have a conversation with my wife about respect and family and the difference between protection and control. As they finalized their plan, Maya would drive to the Patterson house and invite Sam for a visit with Nana, while David confronted Jessica about her unilateral decision-making and Pastor Hendricks arranged a family counseling session. Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in Millbrook. Hope. Not the desperate hope she'd carried for reconciliation with her mother, or the wishful thinking that had made her believe Christmas dinner might somehow heal 5 years of estrangement. This was different. The solid hope that came from finding people willing to fight for love over fear, truth over comfort, the future over the familiar patterns of the past. An hour later, Maya sat in her rental car outside the Patterson family's colonial-style house, watching Sam through the living room window. Her great-niece was curled up on a sofa, staring at their phone with the particular intensity of someone texting under surveillance. Even from a distance, Maya could see the tension in Sam's shoulders, the careful way they held themselves when they felt unsafe. Maya had called ahead, speaking to Mrs. Patterson with the polite authority of someone making a reasonable family request. I'd love to spend some time with Sam before I head back to Portland. Would it be possible for them to visit with Nana this afternoon? She's been wanting to share some family stories. Mrs. Patterson had been gracious, even warm, apparently unaware of the full scope of the family crisis or Jessica's plans for the day. Of course, dear. Sam could probably use some distraction. This whole situation has been very stressful for everyone. Now Maya approached the front door with her heart pounding, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Sam would spend the afternoon learning family stories or being subjected to conversion therapy designed to convince them that their authentic self was a mental illness to be cured. Jessica answered the door, her face cycling through surprise, suspicion, and barely controlled anger in the space of a few seconds. What are you doing here? I came to pick up Sam for a visit with Nana, Maya said calmly. She's been wanting to share some family history before I leave town. Sam is not going anywhere with you, Jessica said, her voice tight with authority. Especially not today. Actually, came Mrs. Patterson's voice from behind her daughter. I already told Maya that Sam could visit. It sounds like a lovely way for them to connect with their great-grandmother. Maya watched Jessica's face as she realized her mother had undermined her authority, had made decisions about Sam's schedule without consulting her. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. Jessica, who insisted on controlling every aspect of her child's life, was being overruled by her own mother's well-meaning interference. Mother, you don't understand the situation, Jessica said, her voice carrying the strained patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone obtuse. Sam is going through a difficult phase, and they need structure and appropriate guidance. Not exposure to people who encourage their confusion. What confusion? Mrs. Patterson asked, genuinely puzzled. Sam seems like a perfectly lovely young person to me. A little quiet lately, maybe, but that's normal for teenagers. Sam appeared in the hallway behind the adults, their eyes finding Maya's with an expression of desperate hope. In that moment, Maya understood that this wasn't just about avoiding conversion therapy. It was about Sam having someone in their life who saw them as a whole person rather than a problem to be solved. Sam, Maya said, raising her voice to be heard over Jessica's protests. Would you like to visit Nana this afternoon? She's got photo albums she wants to show you, stories about the family you've never heard. Yes, Sam said immediately, moving toward the door with the quick efficiency of someone escaping a burning building. I'd really like that. Absolutely not, Jessica said, stepping into Sam's path. You have an appointment this afternoon, important therapy that will help you work through these identity issues you've been having. I don't want therapy, Sam said, their voice carrying the particular firmness that came from having finally found the courage to advocate for themselves. I want to visit my family and learn about where I come from. The standoff lasted only moments, but it felt eternal. Jessica blocking the door, Sam standing their ground, Mrs. Patterson looking confused about why a family visit had become controversial, and Maya holding her breath as she waited to see which way the moment would tip. Finally, Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the tension with the authority of someone who had raised 5 children and managed a household for 60 years. Jessica Marie, you will stop acting like a prison warden and let this child visit their great-grandmother. Family is what matters most, especially during difficult times. Jessica's face went white with fury and frustration, but she stepped aside. Sam moved quickly toward Maya, grabbing their coat from the hallway closet with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to seize opportunities when they presented themselves. I'll have them back by dinner, Maya promised Mrs. Patterson, though she wasn't entirely sure what condition the family would be in by then. As they drove toward Nana's house, Sam finally relaxed into the passenger seat, their shoulders loosing, the rigid tension that had defined their posture for days. Thank you, they said quietly. I was so scared about that appointment. Mom showed me Dr. Patterson's website. All his success stories about helping kids overcome gender confusion and return to their biological identity. It sounded like torture. It would have been torture, Maya said firmly. And you're incredibly brave for refusing to go along with something that felt wrong. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. Maya pulled into Nana's driveway, looking at this young person who was navigating identity and family and the courage required to be authentic in a hostile world. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Sam. It's doing what's right, even when you're scared. And you've been doing that for months. Inside Nana's house, they found the living room transformed into something that looked like a combination research, library, and war room. Photo albums covered every surface, along with printouts about LGBTQ+ youth resources, family therapy approaches that actually worked, and legal information about parental rights and conversion therapy restrictions. Welcome to the Resistance headquarters, Nana said, embracing Sam with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had decided that love was more important than comfort. We've got work to do. For the next several hours, they worked together, on something Maya hadn't expected when she'd agreed to pick up Sam for a family visit. They weren't just avoiding conversion therapy. They were actively building the support system that Sam would need to navigate their identity journey safely, regardless of what their parents ultimately decided. Pastor Hendricks arrived with resources from progressive Christian organizations that affirmed LGBTQ+ youth, proof that faith and acceptance weren't mutually exclusive. Jake brought his own teenage daughter, who immediately connected with Sam over shared interests in art and music, and the particular challenges of being a thoughtful young person in a small town that didn't always reward thoughtfulness. David showed up at 3 o'clock, looking exhausted but determined. I had the conversation with Jessica, he announced. It didn't go well, but it was necessary. What happened? Maya asked. I told her that I wouldn't support conversion therapy under any circumstances, that our child's mental health and well-being were more important than our comfort with their identity, and that if she wanted to pursue a therapy approach, it needed to be with someone who actually specialized in helping transgender and questioning youth, not someone who promised to make them cisgender. How did she take it? David's laugh was bitter. About as well as you'd expect. She accused me of choosing political correctness over family values, of being corrupted by your influence, of failing in my duty as a father to protect our child from harmful ideas. And what did you say? I said that my duty as a father was to love and support my child unconditionally, not to force them into a mold that made other people comfortable. And I said that if she couldn't accept that, maybe we needed to have a more serious conversation about what our marriage meant and whether it could survive this fundamental disagreement about how to treat our child. Sam looked up from the photo album they'd been examining with Nana, their eyes wide with something that might have been hope. Dad, you really said that? I did, and I meant it. David moved to sit beside his child, putting an arm around their shoulders. Sam, I need you to know, whatever happens between your mother and me, whatever decisions we have to make about custody and living arrangements, You will always have at least one parent who loves and supports you exactly as you are. The moment was tender and transformative. A parent choosing their child's well-being over their own comfort, love over fear, truth over the familiar patterns that had shaped their family for generations. There's something else, David continued. Pastor Hendricks managed to convince Jessica to postpone the Columbus appointment until after we've had family counseling sessions. Mrs. Patterson pointed out that rushing into major decisions during a family crisis was rarely the best approach. As the afternoon wore on, they began planning what Maya was starting to think of as Sam's authentic family support system, the network of people who would love and support them regardless of where their identity journey led. It included blood relatives like Maya, David, and Nana, chosen family like Jake and his daughter, and institutional support like Pastor Hendricks's progressive approach to faith and family. But most importantly, it included Sam themselves, a young person who was learning to advocate for their own needs, to trust their own understanding of their identity, and to believe that they deserved love and support exactly as they were. As the sun began to set over Millbrook, painting the snow-covered streets in shades of gold and pink, Maya realized that they had accidentally created something she'd never experienced before. A family Christmas dinner, where everyone was truly welcome, where love was offered without conditions, where being authentic was celebrated rather than hidden. "You know what?" Sam said, looking around the room at their assembled chosen family. "This feels more like Christmas than anything we did at the house." "That's because it is Christmas," Nana said firmly. "Real Christmas. The kind where love shows up without conditions and families are built on choice rather than just biology." And in that moment, surrounded by people who had chosen courage over comfort, love over fear, and truth over tradition, Maya Johnson finally understood what coming home really meant. It wasn't about earning acceptance from people who would never see her as fully human. It was about creating space for authentic love to grow, building families based on choice and commitment rather than just shared DNA, and learning that some traditions were worth preserving while others needed to be transformed. The garage seat that had been meant as punishment had become the foundation for something entirely new. A family that made room for everyone to be themselves. A Christmas that celebrated authenticity over performance. And a future where young people like Sam could grow up knowing they were loved exactly as they were. The garage seat that had been meant as punishment had become the foundation for something entirely new. A family that made room for everyone to be themselves. A Christmas that celebrated authenticity over performance, and a future where young people like Sam could grow up knowing they were loved exactly as they were. But Maya knew that the fragile peace they'd built over the course of the afternoon was temporary. Real change required difficult conversations, painful admissions, and the kind of letting go that felt like small deaths. As evening approached, and it became time to return Sam to their mother's custody, Maya felt the weight of everything still unresolved pressing down like the gray Ohio sky. David drove Sam back to the Patterson house while Maya returned to her motel room to pack and process the emotional whiplash of the past few days. She had originally planned to stay through New Year's, but the family crisis had accelerated everything. There was no point in lingering in a place where her presence caused more harm than good. Better to return to Portland and provide support for Sam from a distance while David navigated the immediate custody and therapy battles ahead. She was folding her clothes into her suitcase when her phone rang. Teresa's name on the screen made her pause, finger hovering over the accept button. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. "Hello, Mom. Michael." Teresa's voice was carefully controlled, carrying the particular tension of someone who had rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "I heard you're leaving tomorrow." "Yes, I think it's best for everyone." Teresa's voice faltered, then resumed with obvious effort. "I wanted to talk to you before you go. Could you come by the house, just for a few minutes?" Maya closed her eyes, feeling exhausted by the prospect of another emotional confrontation. "Mom, I don't think—" "Please. There are things I need to say, things I should have said years ago." The vulnerability in Teresa's voice was unexpected, cutting through years of careful control and religious certainty. Against her better judgment, Maya found herself agreeing to one final visit to the house where she'd grown up. 30 minutes. Later, she stood on the familiar front porch, looking through the window at the Christmas tree that still glowed with warm light Despite the family crisis that had torn through the house like a tornado, Teresa answered the door immediately, as if she'd been waiting and watching. "Thank you for coming," Teresa said, stepping aside to let Maya enter. "The others aren't here. David's dealing with the situation at Jessica's mother's house. I wanted to talk to you alone." The living room felt different without the extended family filling it with noise and activity. Quieter, smaller, more intimate in a way that made difficult conversations seem both more possible and more dangerous. "Would you like some coffee?" Teresa asked, her hands fluttering nervously as she struggled with the social choreography of a conversation she'd never had to navigate before. "I'm fine, thank you." They settled into chairs on opposite sides of the room, the physical distance reflecting the emotional gulf that had grown between them over the years. Maya waited, recognizing that this was Teresa's conversation to begin. "I've been thinking," Teresa said finally, her voice carefully measured, "about what you said at Christmas dinner, about the garage, about banishing you from the family table." Maya remained silent, having learned years ago that sometimes the most powerful response was to let people fill their own silence with truth. "It was cruel," Teresa continued, the admission seeming to cost her physical effort. "I told myself it was practical, that we simply didn't have enough room. But that was a lie. I had enough room. I chose not to make room." The acknowledgement hung between them like a bridge that might bear weight or might collapse at the first step. Maya felt a complicated mixture of relief and wariness, grateful for the admission, but cautious about what might come next. "Why?" Maya asked quietly. Teresa was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if she'd changed her mind about having this conversation. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone excavating buried pain. "Because seeing you, seeing who you've become, it terrifies me. Not because you're different, but because you're happy. Because you found a way to be yourself that I never learned." The words were so unexpected that Maya felt her carefully maintained emotional distance crumble. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've spent my entire life trying to be the person other people expected me to be. The good, Christian wife, the devoted mother, the woman who never questioned anything or wanted anything that didn't fit the prescribed role." Teresa's hands twisted in her lap, revealing the cost of a lifetime of performed contentment. "And then you transition, you become yourself. You build a life based on authenticity rather than expectation. And it forces me to confront everything I gave up by choosing safety over truth." Maya stared at her mother, seeing for the first time the person beneath the careful facade of religious certainty. "What did you give up?" "Dreams. Ambitions. The right to question whether the life I was living was the life I actually wanted." Teresa's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if naming these losses gave them power. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was young. Not just the church secretary, but a real teacher. I wanted to travel, to read books that challenged my assumptions, to have conversations about ideas rather than just gossip and recipes. You could have done those things." "Could I? In this town, in this church, married to a man who needed me to be his support system rather than my own person?" Teresa shook her head. "Maybe I could have, but I chose not to. I chose the safe path, the expected path, and then I spent 40 years convincing myself it was the only path worth taking." Maya felt her anger toward her mother shifting, not disappearing, but complicating itself with understanding. Teresa's rejection hadn't just been about religious, doctrine, or social expectations. It had been about the painful recognition that Maya had found the courage to live authentically while Teresa had spent a lifetime hiding from her own truth. "That doesn't excuse how you treated me," Maya said carefully. "No, it doesn't. It explains it, maybe, but it doesn't excuse it." Teresa met Maya's eyes directly for the first time since the conversation began. "I punished you for having the courage I never found. I used religion and tradition as weapons against the possibility that there might be other ways to live, other ways to be a woman, other ways to find happiness." The admission was so raw, so complete, that Maya felt tears, starting despite her intention to maintain emotional distance. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because yesterday I watched my granddaughter, my great-granddaughter, Choose authenticity over safety, truth over comfort. I watched Lily, Sam, stand up to their parents and demand the right to be themselves. And I realized that courage is inherited, passed down through generations, and that maybe the most important thing I can do is stop standing in the way of it. Teresa stood up, moving to the mantelpiece where family photos displayed decades of carefully curated happiness. She picked up a frame that Maya hadn't noticed before, a picture of Maya at her college graduation, smiling with the particular joy that came from having survived the first phase of becoming herself. I kept this, Teresa said, holding up the photo. Hidden it from Frank, from the rest of the family, from myself most of the time. But I kept it because even when I was angriest at you, even when I was most afraid of what your choices meant, I could see how happy you were, how free. Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion she'd been holding back for years. Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness, Teresa said quickly. I know I don't deserve that. I'm not even asking for a relationship, because I understand that I may have damaged things too badly for that to be possible. I'm just asking you to know that I see you now. I see who you really are, and I'm sorry it took me so long to find the courage to look. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the sound of snow hitting the windows. Maya felt herself at a crossroads. She could hold on to the anger and hurt that had sustained her through years of rejection, or she could allow space for the possibility that people could change, that love could overcome fear, that families could heal even when they couldn't be fully repaired. I don't know how to do this, Maya admitted. I don't know how to have a relationship with someone who spent years rejecting my existence. Neither do I, Teresa said. But maybe we could figure it out together, slowly, with patience and honesty about how much damage has been done. Before Maya could respond, the front door opened and David entered with Sam beside him, both of them looking exhausted but relieved. Sam's eyes immediately found Maya, their expression carrying the particular urgency of someone who had news to share. The family counseling session is scheduled for next week, David announced. Jessica agreed to work with Dr. Rebecca Chen, a therapist who actually specializes in helping families navigate gender identity issues in healthy ways. And Mom said I could choose my own pronouns during the sessions, Sam added, their voice carrying tentative hope. She's not happy about it, but she agreed that the therapist should hear from me directly about what I'm experiencing. Maya felt a surge of relief that had nothing to do with her own situation, and everything to do with Sam's safety and well-being. That's huge progress. It's a start, David said. We still have a lot of work to do, and I'm not sure Jessica is fully committed to accepting whatever Sam discovers about themselves. But it's movement in the right direction. Sam moved to stand beside Maya, their presence a reminder of why this whole complicated homecoming had been worth the pain. Are you really leaving tomorrow? I think it's best, Maya said gently. Your family needs space to work through this without the complication of my presence making everything more intense. But we'll stay in touch, right? I mean, not just online anymore. Real contact? Maya looked at David, who nodded immediately. Absolutely. Whatever Sam needs, whatever level of contact helps them feel supported. And maybe, Sam's voice carried the particular hopefulness of someone testing the boundaries of new possibilities. Maybe I could visit you in Portland sometime? See what it's like to live in a place where being different isn't considered dangerous? I would love that, Maya said, meaning it completely. When you're ready, when your parents are ready, when it feels right for everyone. Teresa had been listening to this exchange with the particular attention of someone trying to understand a language they'd never learned to speak. Finally, she cleared her throat with obvious nervousness. Sam, she said, her voice careful but not unkind. I owe you an apology too, for not listening when you tried to talk to me about your questions, for dismissing your feelings as confusion rather than recognizing them as courage. Sam stared at their great-grandmother with surprise and wariness, clearly unsure whether this was genuine change or tactical maneuvering. You don't have to apologize to me, Grandma Great. You weren't the one who wanted to send me to conversion therapy. No, but I supported it. I thought forcing you to be someone you're not was the same as protecting you from harm. I was wrong. The words were simple but revolutionary, coming from a woman who had spent decades believing that love and control were the same thing. that protection meant preventing rather than empowering. "What changed your mind?" Sam asked. Teresa looked at Maya, then back at Sam, her expression carrying the particular vulnerability of someone who had decided that truth was more important than comfort. "Your Aunt Maya came home for Christmas hoping to find acceptance, and instead she found rejection and cruelty. But she handled it with grace and dignity that taught me more about faith and love than 40 years of church sermons. And," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "I realized that if I kept choosing fear over love, control over acceptance, I was going to lose not just Maya but you too, and David, and everyone else who mattered to me." Maya felt something shift in her chest, a door opening that she'd thought had been permanently sealed. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of forgiveness. Not reconciliation, but the beginning of understanding that might someday become reconciliation. "Mom," she said quietly, "I need time to process all of this. Years of rejection don't heal overnight just because someone finally understands why they were wrong. I know. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or for everything to go back to normal. I'm just asking for the possibility that someday, maybe, we might find a way to be family again." David looked between his mother and sister with the expression of someone watching a miracle happen in slow motion. "Maybe we could start small. Phone calls, letters, gradual contact that doesn't require anyone to pretend the past didn't happen." "I'd like that," Maya said. "I'd like to try." As they talked through the logistics of maintaining contact, of supporting Sam through the upcoming family therapy, of slowly rebuilding trust that had been shattered by years of mutual hurt, Maya felt herself letting go of something she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her essential self: the need for her mother's approval, the desperate hope that her family of origin might someday love her unconditionally, the belief that she was somehow incomplete without their acceptance. She didn't need Teresa's approval to be whole. She didn't need David's protection to be safe. She didn't need her extended family's recognition to be valid. But having their love, their support, their gradual willingness to see her as she really was, that was a gift she hadn't expected and didn't know how to measure. As the evening wound down and Maya prepared to say goodbye to the house where she'd grown up, she realized that coming home hadn't been about earning acceptance after all. It had been about learning who she really was when she stopped performing for other people's comfort, about building chosen family relationships that honored authenticity over biology, and about discovering that love, real love, was something that had to be offered freely, or it wasn't love at all. The garage seat that had been meant as punishment had become a sanctuary. The exile that was designed to shame her had become a space where honest conversations could finally happen. The rejection that should have destroyed her had instead revealed who was worthy of her love and who wasn't. And in the end, that was the most valuable gift her family could have given her. The clarity to see the difference between love that required her to be smaller and love that invited her to be herself completely. 6 months later, Maya stood in the arrivals area of Portland International Airport, holding a sign that read "Sam Johnson" in rainbow letters, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. The past half-year had been a whirlwind of change. Family therapy sessions conducted via video call, careful conversations with Teresa that slowly built trust, and most importantly, watching Sam navigate their identity journey with the kind of courage that left Maya in awe. The family counseling with Dr. Chen had been transformative, though not in the ways anyone had expected. Jessica had entered the process determined to fix what she saw as Sam's confusion. But week after week of listening to her child articulate their experiences with growing clarity and confidence had forced her to confront the difference between loving someone and controlling them. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, arguments, moments when Jessica had reverted to her old patterns of trying to force Sam into the mold of her expectations. But Dr. Chen had guided them through each crisis with the skill of someone who understood that family healing required patience, honesty, and the willingness to grieve the loss of who people thought they were supposed to be. Sam had settled on they-them pronouns, and decided to keep the name Samuel, after their late great-grandfather, but shortened to something that felt more authentically theirs. They'd also begun hormone blockers with Dr. Chen's support, giving them time to explore their identity without the pressure of irreversible physical changes. Most remarkably, David and Jessica's marriage had survived. Not unchanged. Jessica was still learning to accept that love didn't mean control, and David was still learning to stand up for his principles even when it made others uncomfortable. But they'd chosen to do. Crisis and pain, that love meant celebrating who people were rather than demanding they become someone else. Maya snapped several photos, capturing the moment when acceptance became not just possible, but joyful. After the ceremony, they gathered at Nana Wilson's house for the graduation party that had become a tradition for the extended family. The same living room that had once been a battleground for Sam's right to exist had been transformed into a celebration space, filled with photographs documenting their journey from questioning teenager to confident young adult. "I have an announcement," Sam said as the family settled into the familiar arrangement of chairs and sofas. "I got the scholarship. Full ride to Portland State, starting this fall." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Sam had applied for a scholarship program specifically designed for LGBTQ+ youth who had overcome significant challenges to pursue higher education. Their essay about navigating family acceptance while building authentic identity had moved the selection committee to tears. "Portland State," Maya repeated, feeling her heart swell with possibility. "You'll be right there with me." "That was kind of the plan," Sam grinned. "I want to study social work, like you. I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through." Maya felt tears starting, overwhelmed by the beauty of this full-circle moment. The frightened teenager who had reached out to her anonymously online had become someone who would carry the work forward, who would help other young people find their authentic selves and build supportive communities. "There's something else," Sam continued, pulling out an envelope with nervous excitement. "I've been working on something with Maya's help. A scholarship fund for LGBTQ+ youth in small conservative towns who need support to pursue higher education in affirming communities." They opened the envelope to reveal incorporation papers for the Frank Johnson Memorial Scholarship Fund, named after the grandfather who had begun reaching toward acceptance before his death. Maya stared at the documents, seeing her father's name attached to a legacy of love and support that would outlive all of them. "How?" she whispered. "Nana helped," Sam said, looking toward their great-grandmother with obvious affection. "She said Grandpa Frank would have wanted his name on something that helped kids be themselves, and Pastor Hendricks convinced the church board to make a founding donation." Maya looked around the room at these people who had chosen growth over comfort, love over fear, possibility over the familiar patterns of the past. Pastor Hendricks had quietly revolutionized his approach to LGBTQ+ ministry, becoming a voice for acceptance within the conservative religious community. Jake Morrison had become an unofficial advocate for LGBTQ+ youth in Millbrook, using his position as a respected community member to create safer spaces for kids who didn't fit traditional expectations. "I'm proud of you," Nana said, reaching over to squeeze Sam's hand. "Not just for graduating, not just for getting the scholarship, but for becoming someone who makes the world better for other people like you." "I learned it from watching all of you," Sam replied. "From Maya, who showed me that being authentic was possible. From Dad, who chose love over fear even when it cost him. From Mom, who learned that protecting someone means supporting who they are, not forcing them to be someone else. From you, Nana, who taught me that family love is supposed to be unconditional." As the evening wound down and family members began to leave, Maya found herself alone with Sam on Nana's front porch, watching the summer sunset paint the familiar streets of Millbrook in shades of gold and possibility. "Are you ready?" Maya asked. "For Portland? For college? For all of it?" "I'm terrified," Sam admitted, "but also excited. 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine a future where I got to be myself openly. Now I'm planning a career built around helping other people find their authentic selves." "Your grandfather would be so proud," Maya said, thinking about Frank Johnson's tentative text messages and his hidden photo albums, his careful attempts to reach across fear toward love. "I think he is proud," Sam said quietly. "I think all of them are, the family members who came before us, who didn't get to live authentically, but who paved the way for us to have that choice." Maya nodded, understanding that their journey wasn't just about individual transformation, but about generational healing, about breaking cycles of fear and silence that had shaped their family for decades. "Thank you," Sam said as they prepared to head inside. For coming home that Christmas, for sitting in the garage instead of fighting for a seat at the table that didn't want you, for showing me that exile can become sanctuary, that rejection can become the foundation for something better. Maya smiled, thinking about the garage seat that had been meant as punishment, but had become the birthplace of authentic family relationships. Thank you for teaching me that coming home isn't about returning to where you started. It's about creating spaces where love can grow without conditions, where authenticity is celebrated rather than hidden. As they stood together on the porch of the house where so much healing had taken place, Maya realized that her Christmas journey home had accomplished something she'd never expected. She hadn't earned acceptance from people who were determined to reject her. Instead, she'd learned to build chosen family relationships with people who valued her authenticity, who celebrated her truth, who understood that real love meant supporting who people were rather than demanding they become someone else. The garage Christmas had become a tradition that would outlive all of them, a celebration of authentic love that honored both struggle and triumph, both the family you're born into and the family you choose to create. And somewhere in that space between rejection and acceptance, between fear and love, between the familiar and the possible, they had all learned what it meant to truly come home. The weight of words had been lifted, replaced by the power of authentic voice. And that power, once claimed, could never again be taken away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.